This is breaking news.
Happening right now, U.S. Customs and Border Protection in New York is holding a briefing to highlight joint law enforcement efforts to stop the flow of...
Mr. Tim Foley, Acting Special Agent in Charge, Drug Enforcement Administration. Kevin O'Malley, Jr., Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Homeland Security Investigations. And lastly, Captain Brian Nihus, Criminal Enterprise Investigations Unit, NYPD. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Frank Russo, New York Field Office Director of Customs and Border Protection.
Thank you, Anthony. Welcome, everyone. We are standing in the International Mail Facility at JFK, where CBP processes more than 60% of all international mail. This is also JFK, where over $110 billion worth of air cargo goods arrive annually. Most of those goods are legitimate. Most of those help the economy. Some of those products were even used to fight the COVID pandemic this year. We're talking about masks and gloves and other personal protective equipment that really helped us fight the pandemic. But among those products, you will also find some of these weapons and weapons parts that are harming the city and harming the state and harming the country. And so it is very important that we work with our partners to make sure that we fight these weapons and weapons parts from coming into the country, and that we work hand in hand to share the information and to make sure that we keep these products off of the streets. Today, more than ever, with a bail reform law that has no regard for the safety and security of the public, we need to make sure that under intense pressure, we keep these weapons off the streets. Because ultimately, if we don't, they end up in the hands of those dangerous individuals who are on the streets of New York. Last year, CBP, along with our partners, seized more than 2,700 shipments of weapons and weapons parts arriving here at JFK. Some of those parts, silencers, Glock switches, any part that you can name to make a gun, were seized here at JFK. Ammunition as well. It is vitally important that we work with our partners, that we share this information, that we map out the areas within New York that are the hottest areas to ensure that these products never get to the streets. We are under intense pressure, but pressure is a privilege, and we are committed at CBP to protect this country, and we will continue to do that. I'm now going to turn it over to Assistant Special Agent in Charge Tim Foley of the DEA for remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you to all the law enforcement here today, CBP, HSI, and NYPD. DEA has built a foundation around task forces across the nation and working with federal, local, state partners as a force multiplier in our DEA investigations. As many of you know, drugs and gun violence go hand in hand, as evident in our cases. The vast majority of criminal drug networks are engaged in gun violence. In 2021, DEA and our law enforcement partners seized more than 8,700 firearms connected to DEA investigations of drug trafficking organizations. DEA New York has seen gun seizures increase to more than 200%. Solving violent crime in partnership with our state, local, and federal partners has always been core to DEA's mission. As an example of this collaboration, in late January of this year, DEA, CBP, HSI, NYPD, New York State Police arrested 2 men from the Moores Park neighborhood in the Bronx for a drug-related kidnapping and assault. As a response to the increase of drug-related violence and overdoses, DEA initiated Operation Overdrive to address this issue using crime data statistics and CDC data. Fentanyl seizures have seen an increase over 200%, and DEA has seized more than 20% of all the fentanyl seized nationwide. I'd like to thank CBP for coordinating this event to bring attention to the good work by our law enforcement partners. Every agency is working hard to stop the violence, stop the crime, save lives, and build safer communities. Right now, I'd like to introduce Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Kevin O'Malley of Homeland Security Investigations.
Thank you, Tim. I want to first take the time to recognize our partners that are here today. CBP Director Frank Russo, Acting SAC DEA Tim Foley, and NYPD Captain Brian Nias. Thank you for your continued partnerships. I think it's clear why we're all here today. It's not a secret that there has been an increase in gun violence throughout New York and throughout the rest of the United States. In 2020 and 2021, New York City experienced a significant uptick in violent crime to include gun violence, robberies, and felonious assaults. In response to this violence, HSI Task Force have focused efforts on conducting intelligence-driven, targeted enforcement operations with a goal of identifying, arresting, and prosecuting violent offenders and gang members who are a threat to public safety and a danger to our communities. We also initiated complex criminal investigations designed to dismantle hierarchy and infrastructure of these criminal organizations by pursuing racketeering and criminal enterprise charges. Our communities increasingly live in fear. Fear of the next shot, fear of the next stray bullet. Law enforcement must work together in lockstep to not only remove these weapons from the street, these weapons that cause fear and violence, but to also stop them from ever entering our neighborhoods. What's tricky about ghost guns is that there are not any serial numbers. It's a criminal's dream for law enforcement to have difficulties to trace a weapon, especially when used in a violent crime. So here's our trick: incredible partnerships and shared intelligence. Whether it's HSI JFK's task force working closely with CBP, our violent gang task force working hand in hand with NYPD, DEA, and the ATF, or our cyber team tracking illicit weapons on the darknet with our partners at the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. HSI special agents are out there every day using our robust federal authority to address this serious problem. Weapons parts, like those that you see here today, were intercepted from overseas. Quite simply, it's illegal to import undeclared gun parts. Information from these seizures is forwarded to the HSI New York Operations Cell, located right here at JFK. This is where the investigation begins and the collaboration with our partners takes shape. The fact is, nothing is completely untraceable. And those that use the darknet to buy these parts are not as anonymous as they may think. To those individuals, I'm here to tell you that analysts are tracking, law enforcement is watching, and you will be arrested. Thank you. I'd like to turn the podium over to Captain Brian Nias from the NYPD Criminal Enterprise Unit.
Thank you, Kevin. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for CBP for inviting us all here today. Information sharing in law enforcement is one of the most important tools that we have for combating any type of crime, especially violent crime and crime driven by drugs and guns. The task force model that everyone has been talking about here today is vital in doing that. Seizures made by CBP at this mail facility and other parts of the city lead to information that HSI, NYPD, and the DEA can use to target their criminals. These targets lead to prosecutions and hopefully less violence in the city. The task force model also allows us to go beyond the reach of New York City. It allows NYPD, HSI, and DEA to go outside the city, outside the state, and if necessary, outside the borders of the United States. This information sharing leads to more robust prosecutions and, more importantly, safer cities with less crime. The parts that we're seeing here today unfortunately come in on a regular basis, and we're doing everything that we can to stop it. The parts that get through and go to the criminals that are committing these crimes in the violent gangs and on the streets are being targeted by us and by other law enforcement agencies for prosecution. It is necessary that we all work together and share this information and and target these crimes and criminals. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to invite all the media to come up a little closer to the stipulated table as we're going to do a little bit of show and tell. So I'm going to ask you Q&A. Can we ask any question? Sure. If you like the question, absolutely.
How many are confiscated in a year? How many parts, or how many guns would be put together with the parts you have here?
So last year, CBP seized over 5,000 parts. So in terms of actual weapons, it can vary, but what you see here are all bits and pieces of those parts that can be put together.
Describe some of the ways they're trying to get in.
In terms of shipments, it's really anything. You'll see on the screen to my left parts coming in toy boxes, but really, when it comes to this kind of crime, anything goes. So they will put it in any kind of shipment that they can to get it into the country.
What's the dollar value that seized on a daily basis? What's the dollar value on these parts that seized?
I don't have a value. I don't know if any of the partners have a value, but don't really put a value on these weapons parts because that's not the important piece here. The important piece is keeping them off the streets.
What kind of charges are people looking at when they get caught?
Guys, Kevin?
What are the ranges of charges? What are the different?
The type of charges can vary depending on state and local prosecution. We try to take things federally as well, working with our partners at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern and Southern District of New York. We're specifically not only targeting gun parts, but also violent felons. We're trying to keep these guns out of the hands of people on the streets that are using these for nefarious reasons. So if you were a felon, you could be charged with possession of a firearm, a felon in possession of a firearm.
What's the frequency of seizures that you?
So everything that you see on the table here is stuff that we've seized in the last couple of weeks. So it's every day. It's really every day. Like I said, 2,700 seizures in the last fiscal year. So you can imagine that it's pretty much an everyday occurrence.
While you're at the microphone, can you just explain what we're looking at?
Sure. One more, Eddie.
From last year, you said 2,700 this year. How many last year?
So pretty much on par for same as the prior year. I think it's important to note that while passenger volume is down, shipments coming into the country are actually on the rise. But we've seen a steady state in terms of the number of weapons that we're seizing and weapons parts. And so what you're seeing here, to answer the question, everything from magazines to butt ends to butt stocks to Glock switches that turn semi-automatics into automatics, silencers, really any part that you can think of to make a weapon, it's on the table in front of you.
So at that point, if you guys want to come a little closer to the
Thank you.